So again, thank you all for being here tonight and joining me for another in the series of Effective Effort Consulting's monthly webinars. Dr. David Murphy and I and our incredible team of coaches have begun to offer these as a way to support a community of parents who have kids with executive function deficits, who have ADHD, who are neurodiverse, and who have other complex learning profiles. My name is Courtney Edman, and I'm the director of EEC's To Empower Parents. I'm a parent coach. I'm an executive function coach. I'm a twice exceptional specialist, and I'm a mom of a neurodiverse 2E college student who is twice exceptional himself. Tonight, though, our webinar is focused on gap years, and we're so excited to have Jane and Jason Sarouhan here tonight. And they're going to share, you're going to be so impressed with their expertise about this subject, and I'm really excited to introduce them. But first, I want to just share some of the logistics for this evening's presentation and webinar. So I mentioned that it's being recorded, and anybody and all of you who have registered will receive the recording in a couple of days. A number of you did share questions upon your registration, and I have compiled them here. And I'm certain that Jane and Jason will get through will touch on a lot of the questions within their presentation. But if not, feel free to continue to ask other questions, and I will try to keep track of the questions that you've asked and make sure they're covered at the end during a question and answer time. If you have questions that bubble up, however, during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat, which is down on the right-hand corner in the little text bubble. If you find it, I'll be monitoring that for other questions. And I know that we said that this would go till about 8 or so, but it's probably going to go a little bit longer. It's hard to compress all of this great information into a short period of time. If you need to leave, feel free to leave, but and you will be sent the recording. But if you have questions and you want to stay, we'd love for you to stay. We'd prefer for you to stay, but we understand if you need to leave. So getting back to why we're all here tonight, I'm so excited to introduce Jane and Jason Sarouhan, and you'll be able to see them shortly. They are the J2 of J2Guides, which is a professional gap year consulting service. The reason that I chose them to share information with us tonight is because they not only have a wealth of information about traditional gap years, or the way that we think of gap years perhaps, but they also understand the needs of students who have executive function challenges, who have ADHD, who are twice exceptional, and who aren't necessarily looking for a traditional gap year, but rather are looking for a bridge to college or a bridge to career, as I like to call it, or just need a little bit of extra time to develop independent skills, life skills, and explore their interests. So Jane and Jason understand and have knowledge of programs. They love supporting families and students in need of an outside of the box bridge to college or career here or gap year. And I just think so highly of them, and I'm excited and grateful that they are here tonight. So without further ado, Jane and Jason, take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to just open up a screen share, and hopefully everyone can see that. Great. We were just joking before everyone got brought into the room that this used to be a presentation, or a version of a presentation that Jason and I used to spend 45 minutes making, traveling all over the country in different schools. And we've gotten pretty good at bringing it down to 20 or 25 minutes, but there's so much to say about this topic because we're talking about our kids and these brilliant, fabulous young adults who have potentially not found their groove in a traditional academic setting. Just a word on Jason and our own background. We're going on year probably 27 actually, but 25 years just sounds better. So 25 years we've been in this field of experiential education. Jason and I both took gap years ourselves. We met much further along in this timeline, as you can see, but had pretty, excuse me, parallel lives. Took gap years during college, in fact, for different reasons, but had equal outcomes of really lighting up around our academic careers, finding mentors, peers who, like us, were looking to learn outside of the four walls of a classroom. And it really refueled our passion for learning and widely expanded our perspective of what else could be out there for us. And Jason and I both started cutting our chops as field instructors. Jason did a lot of wilderness guiding. I was guiding students on community service and immersive cultural programs throughout Africa and Asia mostly. Ultimately, we met through the work. We were the directors of a national nonprofit called Global Roots for about a decade. Relocated that organization from Berkeley, California, out to Northampton, Massachusetts, where we are now, post 9/11. And we've been gap year consulting for about 12 years now. So we've really sat and and as parents now of a child with an extensive IEP who we watched her learn to walk in a harness on a treadmill at 2 years old, and just had an extensive 3-year IEP review meeting. She's in 6th grade. Also now have that whole added layer. So we really sat in all the seats. And I think what has kept us so passionately dedicated to this work is recognizing that no two young adults are the same. Not everybody thrives in that traditional academic setting. And that the curiosity, the itch, the even fear, trepidation around stepping off that treadmill once that step is taken just seems to bring success time and time and time again to these young adults who need an ounce or a pound of rejuvenation, of confidence, of finding their success in other environments. And we've seen that with that traditional Ivy League bound student to a student who has, again, really struggled with either mental or physical health or other challenges or disabilities. They have found their way again to their passion, to their sense of self and their sense of purpose. And that's why we keep doing the work. And that's why we're here this evening. I think Jason and I will just toggle back and forth on some slides here.
That was such a nice
Thank
introduction.
you. I'm feeling it tonight.
And one of the things that I was saying earlier to a student who I'm working with is just a lot of our own last year was spent traveling through the United States with our own daughter, living in a pretty small van, visiting gap year students and many gap year programs, as you can see some of those pictured here in the image. And one of the things that I think is amazing is that taking time, stepping out of our typical lives and kind of that treadmill, as Jane was suggesting, to get out in the world and experience our own passions, our own interests, to really gain hands-on opportunities and experiences to grow, was so enlivening for us, for our students, for our daughter. And these images are picked so that you can witness a little bit of the journey for many of the students that we had in this past year. Gap years, whatever they end up being, often contain a lot of the elements that are shared here. They're meant to be fun. They're meant to be very hands-on. Let's take the learning you've already done in the classroom and apply it in the real world, in the adult world. And let's see how you can augment that learning so you can then bring it back to the next space of education or growth that you're going to have post-gap year. They're meant to be skill-oriented. We want you to learn. We want you to grow. We want you to try new things. We want you to have adventures. The outcome should be a little bit unknown because you're going to then be really heightened in your senses. You're going to be really engaged and attuned and intentional. They should help you build independence. This is something that we really look at in terms of gap time, that this is a chapter of your young adult life where you're moving into the adult world, into the adult chapters of your life. You're going to be asked to take on high levels of independence, both in college or beyond that once you've graduated, if that's your path. And those are skill sets that are hard won for all of us. And we really want and believe that gap year can provide that opportunity. And finally, gap year is full of peers, and it's an opportunity for you to really interact with other young adults who are engaged, is an opportunity for you to connect with other people who are passionate just like you, maybe who learn in different ways or have different knowledge to share or different ways of seeing the world that they can share with you. So again, that you can keep growing and you're going to do the same for them.
Yeah, well said. To take it another step, so that last slide, as Jason said, those are all students, all of ours in the first COVID year, last year. Most of them are in college now. And those were words that when I've polled families in the past, what do you see in these images are the words that people are populating. And we knew we didn't have enough time to do that this evening. And I just think it's such an interesting moment because nearly every family, when we begin the conversation, says, whether they are twice exceptional, whether they have a learning challenge, whether there's a mental health issue, my child is so brilliant, but they really just seem to never want to get skin in the game until they're passionate about the thing. Then when they're passionate about the thing, they actually really put some effort into it, which I chuckle, and not not in a demeaning or sarcastic way, but I think that's kind of true for all of us. If we don't like the task at hand, we try to avoid it as much as possible. And I think this is such a distinguishing aspect of gap years. We see students, again, no matter the background, the diagnosis, when given some freedom and some agency to pursue an interest or passion without performance, without that pressure of grade or assessment, and they just get to do the passion, we see them come alive again and see them feel successful. We're going to come back to that in a bit. Because we know there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about what a gap year is. Very common. You talk to a neighbor or a friend or your college roommate, and oh yeah, gap year, isn't that, wilderness stuff, kind of, backpacking in Colorado or volunteering and working with wildlife in Africa. Those are certainly things that young adults can pursue in a gap year. But in fact, this is our working definition, which we've broken down, as you can see, in these sort of phrases. So most importantly, this is an intentional break. This is something that you, your family, your child has decided to do for whatever reasons. And we're going to get to some reasons in the next slide, but it is an intentional break. This isn't an accident. This isn't a luxury vacation. This is an intentional break. Like the path we're on right now is going to come to a halt or a pause because we want to intentionally do something else. It's really the most important part of our entire definition. The rest of it's also really relevant, and I think couples really well with this slide we just came from, which is it generally does involve a certain level of hands-on learning. It's experiential education. So again, we're putting aside the textbooks, we're putting aside the classroom, quizzes, papers, exams. There's still rich and ripe learning to be had of any kind. And we're going to get to that as well. It depends on what your child wants and needs. Today, I've talked to 4 students, and the interests ran from Italian to fashion, to working with animals, to becoming an EMT. So we're going to get to the what based on your child and what is unique to him or her or them. This is really for any age at any time. But predominantly, we are seeing students who have graduated from high school and are taking a year or more before college. We also have growing numbers of current college students who are finding themselves at an impasse. They've done a semester, a year, or 2 years. They're now maybe on academic probation, managing mental health, just not finding what they're looking for in the college path. And that's an equally fantastic time to come to the gap year. It is a time to explore either existing or new skills or interests. Again, is there a hope that it might feed back into the college or career path? Sure, but we don't want that to feel like a pressure. We want a student first and foremost to feel passionate again about learning. And that will translate back into those next steps. Big myth that gap years are only overseas. Absolutely not at all the case. And one of the few silver linings, I think, of COVID is that it did help bring more gapping into the US. Last year, that is what students were doing. And a lot of our typically more internationally focused program providers pivoted to offer very compelling domestic programs. So long existed ones were here, and now a whole new array of new ones. So loads of great opportunities here in our own country. And yes, again, this could be an opportunity to gain real hands-on exposure to a career or an academic path before investing in that next 2 or 4 or more years of higher education.
We want to just highlight what Courtney shared earlier, which is gap time is not a path into, the unknown that just continues on forever. It's a bridge. It's a bridge between two things, generally one's high school or potentially college academics and whatever is next. And so we want you to think about it as perhaps it's not the most direct path onwards to college. Going right on to college would be the direct path, but it actually can be a very rich and rewarding path that leads to a lot more success, a lot more happiness, and a lot more confidence while one is in that setting or in their professional path. So think about it as a bridging experience. Sometimes going the straight and shortest path is not actually the most productive, or certainly not the happiest one that one can take. We talk a lot about the benefits of gap time, and that really gets into why students choose to take this time. Listed here, you're going to see several of the most commonly cited reasons that students share that they're thinking about taking or they have taken gap time. It's probably no surprise to a lot of adults who are witnessing teenagers right now, or to a lot of teenagers who are experiencing being a teenager right now, that academic burnout or mental health are two of the top reasons that students share that they're taking this time. It's a very different path to college now than it was when Jane and I were in school, when we were planning on going to school. The rigors are incredibly high. The pressure feels very intense from a very young age. And certainly the odds of getting into some of these schools that students are shooting for seem lower and lower than ever. And it seems to be the only path presented is to go straight on to this four-year institution. So academic burnout is very high, even for students who have been incredibly successful in high school. Beyond that, the pandemic just added to what was a growing and worsening challenge for a lot of young adults, which is just mental health. A lot of this has been associated with the rise of computers in our pockets, as we all know, but it goes much more beyond that. It goes to the way that we communicate, the way that we're connected, and the amount of information that young adults are trying to absorb, and realizing that there's not a lot of impact they can have even on some of the critical issues that they're being exposed to daily and being bombarded with. So mental health is another reason why students choose to take this time. Beyond that, you're going to note that there's a lot of benefit that is highlighted in terms of preparing for college or for your academic success while you're there. Again, gaining that career experience so that prior to going or even stopping midway through your college career to actually investigate hands-on if that particular career path is the one that you want to pursue professionally, that could dramatically shape and shift the course of your academic study while you're in school, or the way that you approach working in the professional world. And this is something we see over and over and over again as students try their interest in marine biology, or they try their interest in education, or they try out their interest in law and either have the epiphany of, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I want to do, or, woo, thank goodness I checked that out before I dedicated 4 to 8 years of my life studying that, and then realized I don't want to do it. Both things are of real value. Ideally, Jane and I love to see students engaging their curiosity about themselves, about the world, and ultimately gaining a high level of maturity and independence. For students who are managing a learning difference, this is particularly important because, as we all know, for those students, life has been challenging in order to just maintain pace when you are trying to achieve at a very high level. You are doing double, triple the work, putting in double or triple the effort than some of your peers in order to achieve some of the same outcomes. And that can be a very big container to have to hold and carry around all the time. Gap time gives you the opportunity to kind of take your foot off that pedal and really slow down to a pace that works for you, finding those increments of pace that help you feel very successful while also actually achieving the things you want to do.
That's great. And you may find that you or your child really identifies with multiple of these suggestions or have others altogether. But this idea of what is your why is where we start with every student, really sitting down together. And we saw some of those pre-submitted questions about like, how do I get my own child to have buy-in? And that's a really tough one. And I appreciate that question. I don't think I have time to give it the full answer I want, but I think having them feel included in the conversation, particularly it's easier when we get to share kind of some of the exciting opportunities that are out there. But if they themselves are expressing burnout, if they themselves are expressing a lack of readiness for college, and say, a gap year could be a great idea then. Let's talk about it. But so kind of check all that apply is what we often want our families to feel permission to do. There's no wrong answer, but the best way to start charting our course is to actually know what it is we're trying to get after. A little bit more on the vein of myth busting, and there's so much we could talk about, but we had this slide prepared and then we added some to it based on the questions that were submitted. In general, there are a lot of concerns around students losing study habits during a gap year. Really understandable. There's been a lot of support both at home and in school for many of us. Now, these are averages, and we had to really reduce our text to fit it all in here. But actually what we've seen, both anecdotally, but the data is also now coming in because there are researchers following the impacts that gap years are having on students in and after college. Bob Claggett is really credited with doing a lot of this research. And we can put his information in the chat when we're done. But in general, on average, gappers are in fact achieving higher GPAs than their non-gap peers each of their 4 years in college. And again, these are gappers that probably did not touch academics or have a tutor at all during their gap years. So the direct link that we all see in this field is that what is happening is that increased sense of confidence, advocacy, agency, and buy-in. When we set students free into the world and let them apply some of their interests in a real world setting, it's like, oh, now I understand why I've had to struggle through Spanish or math, because actually there's some real world relevancy out here. Now it feels purposeful. Now I get it. And again, what we've heard often from students is the confidence they developed really helped them to, again, get more involved in classes, self-advocate more, going to teachers and TAs in office hours and really asking for help, all elements that were sort of, they knew intellectually was there, but kind of knew that you might help cross that bridge or fill in the gap. So the gap year really has helped to develop that sense of agency. And we've seen that, we believe, directly reflected in the higher GPAs. Similarly, gappers on average are graduating a 4-year college in 4 years. And what no one ever talks about is actually the national average of students graduating right now, a 4-year institution in the United States, is 6 years. Some I've seen 6.5 also. So in fact, and I know it's just a snapshot and it's not speaking just to LD students, it's an average, but what we see is this level of maturity and growth that's having, in fact, incredibly positive impacts on the steps that are following, including academics. In terms of, let's switching more now to gap year programs, which is the final bit of our remaining slides here too, is like, how do gap programs support my LD child? Are there gap year programs specifically for students with ADHD, executive functioning, etc.? There are programs, a few specific to that. And largely what we find is that many gap year programs, and it really comes down to you and your family and your child, but many gap year programs are very well equipped to support a student with a learning difference. Oftentimes we're seeing a student to leader ratio of about 6 to 1. Some programs are 5 or 4 to 1. So we have a really strong leaning in of instructors and role models and mentors that are there to really shepherd students through the experience, both logistically and sort of spiritually, we'll say. More structured programs also are all inclusive. So housing, meals, activities, it's all included. Now, these are the more highly structured experiences, and the next slide is going to touch on that more. And a lot of gap year programs are exclusively focused on personal growth. So there's always content and themes, and whether it's backcountry skills or language or social justice or the environment or art history or engineering or business, personal growth is really at the heart of a lot of the really excellent and quality gap year programs that we see, because everybody, wherever they are on their learning spectrum, needs to learn how to handle themselves as a young adult in the world. And these programs hold students to a really high and tender standard. So when we're sitting in a group together, I'm going to ask you to sit up and not be lying down. If we ask everyone to be here on time at 9:30 for our guest speaker, I'm going to need you to be here. If you're having a conflict with your roommate, I'm going to be here to help you manage that in a really healthy and productive conversation. So gap year programs at their core are really trying to support young adults in stepping into that next level of adulthood, which again is bound to happen at the college level, but there's no one there to mentor it. There's no one there really standing over these students and facilitating it and directly fostering that level of personal growth. And that is absolutely at the core of many, many, many programs. It certainly was when we were at Global Roots. Who are you? How do you want to be? How do you want to comport yourself in this situation? And let me see if I can help.
Can I build off of that to the next
absolutely.
question?
Yeah.
So we get asked a lot, well, what kind of program will be the best fit for my child or will be the best fit for me? And one of the things, and particularly when we're talking about students who are twice exceptional or students who have learning differences, we want to talk about the difference between stretch, which is the act of actually going outside what's comfortable for us, but in a space that we are likely to be successful, even if we're not always graceful, right? It's that learning space that's right on the edge for us. The difference between stretch and stress, right? Stress just brings up more anxiety. It actually releases good and bad chemicals into our bodies and really can create a lot of ultimately distracting energy that doesn't allow us to learn very well. I think all of us as adults know what it feels like to be very stressed. So we're looking at the difference between stretch and stress. When we look at the kinds of programs that are out there, there are a couple of different examples of program models. So one would be a residential program, meaning you live in one place for the majority of your programmatic experience. Let's say that's 3 months. What are the benefits of that? Well, you're actually living in a house. You're probably sharing a room. You probably have a lot of agency over what your living space looks like. You can have consistent and predictable meals 3 times a day that certainly could deal with any allergies that one might have and generally most food preferences. Also, you're going to have hot showers. You're likely going to have internet. You're going to have a lot of predictable comforts. That can really help a student who is engaged in a new culture, who's engaged in a new language and a new activity, be able to really fully dive into those new experiences without having to worry about all of the other living pieces, which can create a lot of stress for us. So a residential program might be an interesting place for one to look. Alternatively, an expeditionary program is a program that's on the move a lot. There are different versions of this, right? You could be in a wilderness setting and on the move often, changing camps nearly every day. The nice thing about a wilderness setting is that the only thing that you're interacting with that's unpredictable in a certain way is the environment. The environment, the weather, the mountain terrain. You're not interacting in a cultural environment or a language environment that could actually bring out a lot of distracting moments that keeps you from some of that learning. Whereas if you were traveling abroad, those things might start coming up. So expeditionary versus residential, these are important things to think about. We can continue down. Is it domestic? Is it international? Is it English speaking? Is it not? These are important things to consider. Luckily, if you do choose a whole gap year, you might get involved in 3 or 4 or 5 different experiences. Maybe you'll build a domestic portion into your time. Maybe you will build an expeditionary portion into your time. Maybe that will be in an international setting. And then finally, we talk a lot about the idea of soft skills versus hard skills. A soft skill is building your capacity to be a part of a productive team. It's building your ability to be an effective communicator. It's building up your abilities to organize information and execute a plan. Hard skills are learning how to take excellent photos, learning how to scuba dive, learning how to rock climb, learning how to cook a really beautiful meal that you can serve to other people. All of these things have a lot of value. Many programs will incorporate both, and some will be focused just on one portion of those. So there's a lot of different factors and considerations that would build into any program you might select.
Yeah. So consider these sort of, buckets of considerations, which rolls really nicely into the final column, which is, what are my next steps in pursuing a gap year? Well, the first, and this comes back to a comment I made earlier about student agency, is giving your child permission to brainstorm every single thing that they could do in a gap year. And before you want to limit them with a budget, or we're not going to pay for that, or whatever kind of interest they have, this is an absolutely critical time for parents and guardians to actually completely hit mute and let students do this brainstorm. Together, over time, you will come to some mutually agreeable options. I can nearly guarantee it. But initially, if we want students to get skin in the game and feel really heard, they need permission to write down everything they want to do, even if that is, I want to travel all over South America and go surfing. I want to stay at home, just cuddle the dogs all day. Things that you're just going to look at your spouse and think, I'm not sure we're on board. It's okay. You can say that later when they're not present. Let them go, because maybe that surfing could happen after they do a few months of some volunteer work in a Spanish-speaking destination, if that was really their interest. And maybe culling the dogs is going to open up an interest they have in working with animals locally at home at the shelter, or starting a dog walking business. So affirm their ideas, give them permission. Oftentimes, students are already so good at self-limiting kind of thoughts. I had this for a long conversation with my students today. And what we want to do is really stop that process, stop that narrative, and let them just have permission to have an idea and a dream, no matter how feasible it is. Separately, parents, what you can be working on is your own list of goals and parameters. So your child doesn't need to know what those are just yet, but maybe your goals are like, I really need to know that our kid is going to be able to, like, in a year's time, if college is on the plan, be able to get out of bed, go to class, do their laundry, keep themselves healthy, sleep well. I need to know they can live independently. Great. Another significant parameter is absolutely budget. So again, that is for you to start to generate. And when the time is right, you're going to come together with your lists and find some happy places where they come together. But it's just absolutely critical. And I can't say it enough, because we do see that process get limited, and we want students to really feel fully accepted for all their ideas. The last thing on this slide is transparency. That is the key to success. Gap year, no gap year in life is transparency. And especially when we're talking about a young adult who is managing a unique set of challenges, whether it's an allergy to bee stings, medication for depression or ADHD, or anything else, speaking in full disclosure with programs only ensures that you and the program together can decide if they are in a position to best support that student. And when we get in trouble, in the field, which is sort of what we talk about in being on program, is when, generally speaking, we didn't have all the information we needed to make sure that we can help keep a student safe and successful. We don't want a student treading water. They've been doing that. We want them to really hit that thriving stage. So transparency is a really critical part as you start investigating specific programs. Second to last slide. Yeah.
So some of what we'd like to share with you as you're looking at the long game, the long planning schema of gap time, is this idea of a progression. So parents, of course, all of us have learned skills in our lifetime. We've learned how to read. Maybe we've learned how to ski or snowboard. Maybe we learned how to swim. We don't bring new readers into a session about Dostoevsky. We don't bring new skiers to the top of the Black Diamond, and we certainly do not throw new swimmers into the deep end of the pool. All of those are recipes for someone to not enjoy an experience and maybe not want to ever go back to it. What we do is we actually build from a strong foundation of learning an environment that feels accessible and relatively safe. And then we let students or the learner practice those skills and move forward in a meaningful way to independence, so that eventually they are swimming in the quote unquote deep end on their own. The gap year is no different. And if you think about that gap time that you have, whether it's 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, we highly encourage you to break that up into a series of different experiences that all build upon themselves, from a place of greatest support in the beginning to greatest independence and least amount of structure at the end. So this is a great slide for you to take a photo of or a screenshot of, because there's a lot happening on here. Would you mind diving into just like some of the nuances that are on the screen?
Well, one thing I definitely wanted to address is we saw among the questions of course, is the expense of a gap year. Really understandable. We want to let you know that, for instance, just in our own experience, we've worked with families, students who were self-funding their gap year and maybe had a few $1,000s, and we've supported families who probably ended up spending about $35,000 in the gap year. So there's a huge range in budget, and it's impossible for us to tell you right now, this is what it's going to cost. But the reason why I want to weave this portion into this slide is because of those dollar signs you see in front of you. So if you're here this evening, it means that you do have a child who you are wanting, hoping, maybe concerned might benefit from more support. And that probably is a young adult who would benefit from at least one very structured program, and you will spend more. The $3 doesn't mean it's $30,000. It just means in the scheme of things, that will be the most expensive program. The structured program that has all the bells and whistles, supervision, peers, wonderful itinerary, housing, activities, you will pay more for that. Because there's so much that's going to be coming in to support that young adult. That may be the kind of program you feel like you need to actually replicate again for the next semester. There are year-long programs, but the vast majority of gap opportunities are a semester. And then there are skill-based courses or other shorter experiences that could be a few weeks, a month. So it may be that your fall program, if that's what it is, or for those of you who are actually looking to gap next semester, there might be a 3-month experience, and that it's you're kind of all in and everything's taken care of. As we strip away the scaffolding, of course, the dollar sign does go down. So a semi-structured program, you have to really look at it to see what's changed. Maybe housing and meals are included, but look at the subtlety of the 2 words below that. Maybe it's not quite of a group program, but maybe there are other peers there. And maybe you don't have a mentor, but maybe there's a coordinator on site. So there's a subtlety there, but really important that semi-structured may not have as much facilitation, not as much mentorship from that person, that guide who's guiding the trip, but maybe there's the volunteer coordinator who's making sure everyone is getting their basic needs met. And then again, if you want to follow this progression, the least structured might look like maybe housing is available, and maybe you have a kind of like a job-like supervisor, but that's it. And you may never want to hit that, and your child may not be up for it, and that's fine. You got to take it all with a grain of salt. And again, the beauty of a gap year is it's your child's gap year. It's not anybody else's. So you need to make it and curate it to their needs and desires. There's so much about the kinds of things that are available. And as you can tell, we've been talking much more macro level and strategically oriented than giving specific program referrals, because it's really important that you understand that bigger picture before we move on.
I'd like to say a word about funding for a moment.
Okay, great.
A lot of families do ask us, well, how does one fund a gap year? We didn't save for this. The good news is that a lot of the structured programs are now kind of housed underneath an organization that offers accreditation. So while a gap year student could earn credit on their gap time, that credit may or may not be transferable to a college, and certainly will not feel like a big academic lift for them. But the big piece about this for families is that one can use 529 money that you might have invested and saved for college to be able to pay for these experiences. Usually those are reserved for higher education opportunities. The gap year in this case becomes that opportunity. So for some of those facilitated, more structured programs, a lot of families are dipping into that 529. We've also seen a lot of students do self-funding. They work during summers, they work during breaks, or they'll do a more structured, very low cost opportunity experience, which will offset some of the overall costs and amortize that over the year. So it is possible, like Jane started out saying, there are a lot of creative ways to fund a gap year. And we certainly would not want the suggestion that a gap year is too expensive to be the limiting factor that stops you from even looking at it. Because again, we've seen students create a gap year on the most shoestring of budgets and have it be meaningful, structured, and very successful for them.
Yeah. Let's pause because we could go so much further. I'm wondering, Courtney, should we pause here and go to questions? If we had ended earlier, we could have talked more about some broad topics, but do we want to turn it over to some of the questions? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that you touched a lot upon, I think having question and answer time right now it's a good time.
Yeah.
You did cover a lot of the questions that were asked in the registration. But one of the things that wasn't yet covered is if my child has applied to college, how does the deferral process work if in the end they decide, yeah, you know what, I think a gap year might be a better way for me to go after high school before college?
That's great. Great question. Should I run with that?
Go for it.
It's actually pretty straightforward. Colleges have become increasingly pro gap year. You know, if you think 4 slides back, I don't know how many, where we were doing some myth busting, because they're seeing those higher GPAs. They're seeing these really engaged young adults on campus who've taken gap years. So across the board, colleges have become incredibly positive towards gap years. And so many colleges will have, you might have to dig for it on the website, but probably have a printed statement about gap years and or deferrals. If not, you just contact the admissions office, and many of you would already have an admissions officer, someone you've been communicating with. Reach out to them. Families are often a little nervous to do this step. You have an acceptance in your hand. It's not going to be taken away by asking. Just like we're thinking about all the wonderful benefits of a gap year. Is this something you've ever gone through before? What would be the process? Even if you've got college applications out and want to start having those calls, do it. And if you feel safe for playing anonymous, play anonymous. Just call up and say, what's your guys' stance on deferrals and gap years? Generally, what you will hear is they would like a written letter. They're going to want your money. So they do want a deposit. They will hold that spot for you for 1 year. And they will want a letter describing from the student describing his or her or their intentions of why they want to take a gap year and what they hope to achieve. I can drop it in the chat box in a moment, but we have a sample letter on our blog. It's one of the more popularly read blog posts that we've probably ever done. So it's a really relevant topic, and we encourage people to go read it, copy it, and edit it to your liking. We talk about this whole idea of the Oreo cookie approach, which is I love your school. Thank you so much. I can't wait to be a part of it. Right. So it's good. And then the constructive feedback in the middle, something we used a lot in the field. So there's all the reasons why I'm so thrilled to be part and so honored to be part of your school community. And I've learned all about this gap year. And I think I could grow as a person, deepen my experience and interest in environmental science or business, whatever it may be. And then I will come back onto your campus in a year's time, a much more engaged and even greater representative of your, academic community, most sincerely. I think Jason just dropped a link to that blog in. I don't know if in nearly 20 years we've ever had a student request be rejected.
No.
So you should feel good about that. And if there are more questions, feel free to message us or email us separately.
An interesting facet and a trend that we're seeing with students who are choosing to take gap time is actually a growing number of students who are not applying to college during their senior year. We have mixed feelings about that approach. On one hand, senior year is, at least in the beginning of it, pretty optimally geared towards students applying to school, right? That's where the emphasis and energy is within your peer set. It's where the emphasis and energy is within your counseling team. So it is a good time to practice applying if you've got the energy for it. So on one hand, it's a very positive thing. You may garner the acceptance or acceptances that you're excited about, and then you're done with it. You can write that deferral, like Jane said, and you've got this secure thing waiting for you when you get back from your gap year. Alternatively, there is this growing population of students who are saying, you know what, senior year is already stressful enough for me, or I didn't have a chance to go view colleges in the way I wanted to. We just couldn't make it happen. Or I have no idea which school I want to go to, or I don't even know if I want to go to college. Or later on, they end up not getting the deferral. They do not get the acceptances that they wanted. And so those students are left to apply during the late fall of their gap time. This is totally possible. If you do legwork in the spring of your senior year to go visit a few schools, be there while students are on campus, see what schools might be a good fit for you, during the summer, you can start pulling together all those resources that you're going to need to apply, lay it out very nicely and neatly, ready to push send when you get home. You're going to go on your fall experience in your gap year. You're going to have something amazing to write about because you just had this incredible thing, whether that was working or going to the ends of the earth and doing community service. And you're going to apply at the end of at the end of your fall of your gap time. And that will be an application submitted for the following year. That is a totally legitimate and reasonable way to approach applying for college. Yeah. That also has a few benefits, which means that you will show your academic trajectory during your senior year. So your senior fall grades count, your senior spring grades count. Maybe you'll have an internship or something else wonderful in the spring of your senior year or that summer. So there's actually quite a few benefits to potentially waiting. So there are strategies, both of them are effective and both of them are very possible.
You just answered the next question I was going to ask, Jason.
ESPN.
That's right, exactly. So one other question was, and I don't know if you know anything about this and can speak to this or not, but a postgraduate year versus a gap year and the pros and cons of that.
It's such a good question.
It really is.
So personal.
I just met with a student on this topic.
I mean,
and just so people, I just want to make sure people understand what a postgraduate year is in case they don't, or you can share that.
Go, Courtney.
Okay. So postgraduate year is someone who has graduated from high school, gotten a diploma, is choosing not to go to college yet, but is going to go to a high school that's like a boarding school type place. To have another year, another senior year effectively, but it's called a postgraduate year. And so if you're looking for that, you look specifically, it's called specifically a postgraduate year.
Yeah. Colloquially, we call it a PG year too, right? And we do see some of our student athletes pursue a PG year. They're two totally different things. I mean, you know, if academic burnout is what's brought you to this conversation and is part of what is your why, then in general, my instinct would say to lean away from PG year, you know, because that's the difference where it's another academic year, it's senior year all over again. So there'd have to be really good and clear reasons that is the right choice for any particular student. Again, whether it was a student athlete, which is really the number one reason we see, if a student really wanted to have another year on their transcript, really showing their academic growth, and found a great school for that PG year. Those would be reasons why people choose it. So I would say a very big difference. And we often hear from families a similar version, but on the other end, why take a gap year if we could do a study abroad year in college? And I say the same thing. I'm like, because a study abroad year is an academic year. So either way, PG, study abroad, what we're looking at is the location may be new and exciting, whether it's boarding school or study abroad, we're living away from home, definitely developing some independent living skills, but it's a full-on academic semester or year. And if that is one of the main reasons that we are looking to pause this pathway, then a gap year is probably the better solution. I feel like we could go on and on, but I want to just try and pause early.
Well said.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was really helpful. So a lot of the other questions have to do with the fact that how do we convince our child, like we're convinced that a gap year is the right thing to do. How do we get our kids to talk to you? And you touched on this a little bit earlier, that it really requires some self-agency and some buy-in and just having a conversation. And I don't know, you know, like having a conversation with you, I think of, and just saying, hey, you have nothing to lose. But I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit more, because I think that is a big question out there still.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the best things, and Jane was really the one who brought this into my mind a few years ago, is to just really, really speak the language of your child, right? Help them find their way to this in a way that is meaningful to them. Find some interesting gap year experiences on social media and put that in front of them, or encourage them to follow a program. Get them on a website and let them investigate a few opportunities. If they're interested in talking to someone else who's done this, get them in front of a webinar that someone's doing, or have them get on social media or text, or even have a phone call with a student who's done this so that they can understand what some of the benefits are. We hear a lot from adults and from young adults who went on to college that they really regret not having taken a gap year, that they realized once they were there, or in hindsight, that college was going to be there no matter what, but this opportunity was so unique, and the benefits of it at that moment in time in their life would have actually helped them enjoy and get more out of that college, or kind of bridge to a career experience, and that it would have really supported their learning and happiness while they were there. But you don't hear students who have taken a gap year say, man, I wish I hadn't done that, right? That's not something you ever hear, even if it was challenging in certain moments, even if it didn't turn out exactly like a student had planned. The growth and learning is just unparalleled, as we all know, being outside of the academic world now and being in the adult world and life. There are some wonderful opportunities to be had that most young adults have never had a chance to explore.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the other questions, and I think this is the last one on the list that I compiled, but what is your role in coaching? Like, I think a lot of parents involved in help supporting their children and applying to college are wondering also, like, did the parents have to be involved in putting applications together for gap years, and kind of how is that rolled into the support that you provide?
Good question.
Yeah. Well, we are very similar to college consultants, independent college consultants, in that we, and particularly for Jason and I, and the way we like to approach this, which is we're always looking to make a kind of real connection with the student. And when we work with the family, the student has exposure to both of us, mostly through recordings. And then they get to pick their counselor. So, a big part of what we talk about is student empowerment and agency out the gate. So we want them to feel like it's their conversation and we're all supporting them. Obviously, that's a lot for them to take on. So we're going to help out a lot. But even just from choosing a counselor, that simple act of like, who do you feel more comfortable with? And then that counselor is really trying to connect with the student and draw them out. And some kids come to the table and like, this is what I want, right? And others are like, I have no idea. Either way, we've seen it all. Our approach will adapt to every student. So it's a matter of drawing out their interests, helping them to identify a few core goals of the gap year, and then get good vetted. That's part of our job, right? Is locating and identifying reputable program opportunities all over the country and world that we think best fit your criteria. Again, in the same way a college counselor is going to say, all right, these are the top 2 or 10 schools I want you to look at. We will do the same thing with gap year. Continuing along this kind of analogy, in the same way that a college counselor will not write those essays for you, nor do we. So parents, you definitely still are involved. Hopefully you'll feel a lot of the pressure off of you by having a consultant involved, but the students do still need to, put in an application and schedule an interview and go through those steps. We are always available to prep students for an interview or review their applications, but I can tell you we offer it all the time and very few students pursue it or take us up on it. And they do great because the gap year acceptance or admissions process is very much a mutual one. So a student is accepted almost in all cases conditionally. So you've submitted an application, there's still a space available. We will hold that space for you until we have a chance to review your application and then have a phone interview and or Zoom at this point. And at that point, looking for program and student to assess each other. Are we a good fit for each other? Here's what we offer in our program. This is who I am as a student. This is what I'm looking for. I think this is going to be a good fit. Programs are not accepting 1,000 applications and accepting the top 20 applicants. So programs do fill first come, first serve, and then making sure, again, that a student is a good fit. So the application process itself should not feel quite as weighty. So we're involved on that kind of strategic level of articulating goals, understanding how to stack programs together, how to kind of arrange the different goals of the gap year, create introductions to get students in touch with programs, review applications. But in the end, some of the minutia of those logistics, the family are responsible for. And then once you're with a program, if there's a flight to be purchased or gear that's required, they will start then sending you, very extensive packing lists or travel requirements, etc.
One of the things that we offer to everyone who's interested in considering gap time is just the opportunity to brainstorm, of course, for free. And we want to sit down and talk with anybody who's interested in this to see if it's even the right fit. We know it's not the right fit for every student, but it is for a lot of people. And it's an amazing opportunity that once interests are linked with some of the possibilities, students say, wow, I had no idea that that could even be, something that I could pursue. And this is maybe something that would be really interesting in addition to college or continuing in school or going on to that trade school. So we encourage you to take us up on that. I'll drop some information here in the chat in just a moment. You can connect with us if you're interested in doing that. There's, of course, no obligations. From a timeline standpoint, if you're a junior, a parent of a junior, this is a really great time for you to kind of daydream about this. At the end of junior year, once the dust has settled from all the junior year is, give us a call. Give us a call this summer. Give us a call this late spring. Let's talk. Let's jump on the phone. Let's jump on Zoom and talk about this before you start really diving into college applications as a senior. If you're a senior right now and thinking about whether or not gap year is a possibility, this is your moment. Basically, late December through March is the critical period of time for you to begin investigating and starting to actually begin applying to gap year programs. If you wait a lot later than that, then you start running up on space availability. So now is the time to investigate that. And if you're a college student and you're wondering if you should be going back next semester, you should have called us yesterday or call us tomorrow. And we'll have a chat and we'll get you on the calendar so we can talk about how you could dive into something for January or February if you want that.
I think you do have ESP because that was the next question that popped into the chat about timeline.
I want to come back to one other piece, the question, because it kind of merges. And I've had a family say to me before, like, how do I lead my horse to the water? Because we've heard you, Jane and Jason, we've heard you say, like, students need to be driving this, but we know this is great, but they're having trouble coming to the table because they're feeling pressured. Like, all my friends are going to school and that's what I'm supposed to do. And they can't give themselves permission to explore this option. But weaving kind of how do I lead my horse to the water with also what is our role? A big part of our role is just stepping in and taking some of that pressure off of that parent-student friction. I can't even begin to say how many times I will like have a suggestion for a student and they're like, that's a great idea. And the parents will be like, we've been saying that for 2 years, So having that outside voice, generally confirming what parents have been saying, but it's coming from someone else, actually can help generate more buy-in. So yeah, just keeping that in mind, that it could be a struggle initially, but as you kind of move and dip your toes in the gap year space, you're just going to find incredibly intelligent and passionate and accessible individuals who your kids will probably start to get pretty interested in. It's a pretty interesting field with just incredible people, just quality people who really believe in this work like we do. So just getting your young adult in front of a few webinars, as Jason said earlier, or a conversation, a free consultation with somebody might help them kind of hear something or see something differently than just you coming at them with this idea. Take some of that pressure off. Yeah.
Jane, I know that you mentioned that you had information about Bob Claggett. I don't know if you have that available now to put into the chat or.
Thank you.
I can share it out.
Jason's gonna drop it in there in the chat in a moment.
There aren't any other questions that I see in the chat. I think you've covered all of the questions that have come in the registrations, and you've shared such great information with us. I'm really, really grateful for you being here. And I don't know if anybody else has any other questions, but if not, just want to say thank you. Thank you all for being here. And next month, if you are interested, we are going to have a webinar in January around I think it's around the 14th or 15th again, with a neuropsychologist. So to learn all about neuropsychology. But thank you so much, Jane and Jason. Really appreciate you being here. And
thank you,
our
Courtney.
pleasure. Yeah.
And
anybody. Go ahead.
We hope that this has inspired you to consider this pathway. There are not a lot of downsides, and there's just a lot of potential for young adults really stepping into that first chapter of their adult lives, feeling great about themselves. And that's all we want as parents, right? Is our young adult to just feel good about who they are and what they're doing in the world. So thank you so much for this opportunity to talk with you all.
I think I want to sign up for a gap year.
Let's talk tomorrow.
Let's talk tomorrow. That's right. Exactly. All right. Thank you all so much. Have a great night, and I will be sending out the recording of this within the next couple of days, so hopefully by Friday. Thank you.